Thank you, Sudarshan. I'm delighted to be here. And when I got in touch with Sudarshan a few weeks back, I was saying that, I'm coming over here. I'd like to kind of catch up with you. I haven't met you for a long time. And the first thing he says, come and give a lecture. And I said, what would you like to talk about? So I couldn't resist the temptation to talk about something that I've done very recently with a couple of other colleagues, and said that, let me share this, and I suspect that, some of the things, that observations, conclusions that we have drawn from this study may be also relevant in your context. But let me start by saying that, moving to the first slide, and Sudarshan, how much time do we have?
We expect to finish by 2:30.
Okay, fine.
Or 2:45, because we want to go to the other talk.
Yes, absolutely.
And you're invited to that as well.
I would be quite keen also to. So I know, I think what we will do is I'll probably finish in 20 minutes, and probably then have a discussion. I think that would be the most interesting bit. So let me sort of say a few words about Bangladeshi politics and governance. And I will sort of not go back to 71, but kind of take 91 as a kind of this watershed in terms of the new wave of parliamentary form of democracy that started after we got rid of the military government. Over the last couple of decades, probably even 3-4 decades, the indicators show that Bangladesh has done relatively well when it comes to some of the social indicators and some of the economic indicators. I think I don't need to dwell too much on that, but I think just as background. But where we have really not done well at all is the issue of governance, the corruption, the weak rule of law, and institutional weaknesses. We've been really grappling with some of these issues in terms of how do we fix them. It's kind of like the experience is like taking one step forward and then taking 2 steps backwards. That's the feeling that one gets. And I've been involved with governance since the mid-90s, governance work in Bangladesh with TI and then with BRAC University. So it's kind of very frustrating. It's like you're banging your head against the brick wall most of the time. So, and in terms of this kind of political economy analysis that we do, look at the big picture, look at the institutions and what are the weaknesses, it seems that it doesn't really give us the full picture. We need to probably look differently, look at other places, kind of use different sort of framework to look at what is really happening. Because on the face of it, Sudarshan will know that over the last 25 years, minus the last 5-7 years, people have been saying, civil society is very strong, very vibrant, media is very open in Bangladesh. But then you see over the last 5 years, it kind of collapsed a bit. We are all on the defensive suddenly. So where is the civil society gone? Where is the media gone? And why is that? So easily the state has managed to kind of clamp down on all these organizations and individuals. So we then thought that we should basically look at, and then let me talk about the Rana tragedy. You know about the Rana tragedy, the Rana Plaza, the garments factory which collapsed in 2013, April 24th, and more than 1,000 people died in that collapse. And why did it happen? A lot of newspaper articles came out, and this, and we started to find out that there was this chap called Zohar Rana, who basically was a kind of a criminal kind of a figure, who has kind of suddenly gone up the world by linking up with politicians and business people. And literally what he did was, despite cracks emerging in the supporting wall and in the buildings generally, he more or less forced people to get into that building that day to carry on with their work, even though people knew that he was really in a bad state. But he just, nobody could stop him. The local authority couldn't stop him. Nobody could stop him. So all these people went in, and then we know what happened. This building collapsed, and over 1,100 people got killed. That had a huge impact on the language sector. I mean, the media, the world media, got to started writing about it and the rest of it. I mean, over the last 2-3 years, a lot of good things have happened from that. But what that tragedy, kind of got a couple of us to think about is that how can Rana happen? How can that incident take place? What are the reasons behind it? So we then sort of started to think about this study and kind of some of the questions that we identified for ourselves, that we could be looking at were these, kind of what economic interests have become the focus of local criminal activities, who is involved in pursuing these interests, how are these interests pursued, who is involved in illegal election-related activities such as patronage and political violence, how do illegal elections... So we kind of came up with these questions and said that, can we try to answer some of these questions by doing this study? Now, before I go into the 3 chapters, and I will actually focus on one of the 3 chapters. Let me just kind of give you a bit of another piece of anecdote which is not there. I was involved in doing a study way back in 79-80 when I was working with an organization called BRAC, which is now the largest non-profit in the world. And I was working in north of Bangladesh where there was a famine situation going on. And while we were actually doing this work with famine victims, we saw that a lot of wheat and rice coming into that area but disappearing, and famine victims are not really getting that money and the resources. So a couple of us actually did a study way back in 79-80 looking at 10 villages and how the power structure in 10 villages kind of operate. And we came up with the publication called the Net Power Structure in 10 Villages. Mm-hmm. And ever since that study in 1980, I've been meaning to go back to that same area and to see how that power structure in those 10 villages have really changed over the last 30 years. Sadly, I've not been able to do that, but this particular incident, the Rana Plaza incident, gave me the excuse to kind of look at the kind of slightly kind of broader picture of power structure in terms of what is happening, and the 3 chapters of this book, and it's now, you can get it on the web actually. I mean, if you Google, I'll give you the link, you will get the full study. We have got 3 chapters. First chapter looking at examining areas of economic crimes and illegal political activities where politicians, mastans and others are involved. So I'll be focusing on that particular chapter today. And the second chapter we'll analyze the asset declaration forms of MPs given in 2008 and 2013 elections. And there's some interesting kind of findings that you see, particularly when you juxtaposition the first issue of linkage between Mastan, and I think Mastan is a known word, right? I mean, to Western people we have to explain what Mastans are, but so juxtapositioning first one with the second makes it very interesting how MPs have suddenly kind of their wealth sort of rocketed in between those 2 elections, during those years, and the third chapter in this book we actually look at 2 constituencies and
basically drill down on the issue of land grabbing and political violence. So, but as I said, I'm going to focus on the first chapter. And the first chapter, the design of this first chapter. Now, we initially thought that we will be able to go and actually speak to the Mastans and see what they have to say. Then we changed our mind. We said that that would be a bit too risky to go and talk to the Mastans and to ask them questions like, how have you got your money and what are your links with the politicians and the rest of it. So we changed the research design and said, okay, who are the people who will actually know about these people quite well? We came to the conclusion that it would be the journalists, who would actually know a lot about these people. So we took 340 journalists across the country, and you will see the instrument at the back in the questionnaire that we gave to them, and we did a survey, and it was in 7 constituencies from 7 divisions. We have 7 divisions in Bangladesh. So it's from 7 divisions, we took 1 constituency each, randomly selected, and then we've got variety of context, peri-urban, rural, border, the rest of it. So that was the design, and again, for that particular chapter, that survey, what the topics that we looked at was main crimes for profit. What are the main crimes for profit? And main actors, frequency of and damage from electoral violence and individuals involved, main forms of patronage in the constituencies and actors controlling such patronage, and characteristics of the main powerful Mastans. Those were the kind of the probing topics that we focused on for that particular chapter. Now, I've put some there are a lot more tables that you will see in the publication, but I've just put up few just to give you a kind of a feel of the whole subject. I mean, you'll see top forms of economic crimes that were identified were land grabbing and drug dealing, in the 7 constituencies that we looked at, and you see what kind of constituencies they were. Peri-urban, semi-rural. But you look at the forms of crime for profit. I mean, there were others on the survey instrument, but these were the top 3 that came up for each of those constituencies, And you can see land grabbing, is the most profitable, common and profitable form of crime is land grabbing. And then you have drug dealing that happens with politicians, as I will show you later on, with politicians and Mastans heavily involved in both. We've kind of a close connection between politicians and the Mastans, the mafia, So and the interesting thing is that a country of the size of Bangladesh, with a population of 160 million and growing, and there's a lot of kind of economic activities going on. There's a lot of people who've gone out of the country sending money. Bangladesh, Rajiv, you may correct me if I'm wrong, but Bangladesh is probably one of the few countries, particularly in South Asia, where the rural wage level has gone up, and it's still going up. I mean, there is, interestingly enough, a shortage of labor in the countryside. There's huge urbanization process that's going on. So land has become amazingly valuable. I mean, in Dhaka, people say the real estate value is same as New York. I'm sure it's true of some places also in India. But so if you can grab a plot of land somewhere, you make a lot of money. And also what has happened is that you have real estate developers, who is a big business in Bangladesh, and basically they get the Mastans and the politicians to help them to grab land illegally or force people to sell land, to them at a lower price, so that they can build those flats and apartments and sell them off. So it's kind of big business. So land grabbing is a form of crime for profit that really is prominent, together with drug dealing, and the different personalities are involved with these. And the next slide will show you that who are the types of people who are involved. Yes.
Sorry,
Yes.
just to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Land grabbing is an issue also in rural areas. Is that the case?
Land grabbing is also prevalent in rural area.
What
But
are the dynamics there? Because you just said labor is an issue. So why are they grabbing land in
it's
the rural areas?
it's very much linked with the kind of economic activities that's taking place. Let me give you an example. In Khulna, which is south of Bangladesh, which is a coastal kind of belt, you have a lot of shrimp farming that goes on, right? And there's a lot of land grabbing going on there in that rural area, because whoever can grab land can do shrimp farming and make a lot of money, So it really depends, very much depends on the kind of economic activity that's going on in that particular area. In urban areas, as I said, real estate development, things like that. In rural area, it's to do with kind of it's fishery or shrimp farming, that kind of activity that would kind of trigger this land grabbing activity. So I mean, it's not just urban; it's also rural, and also I think one of the other factors that we will have to keep in mind is the fact that there's very weak rule of law. So people can get away with it. If you can get the Mastan and the police on your side, it's very easy to grab land and then nothing happens. You can go to court, and the court case can go on for 20 years, for a couple of generations, and without joy. So it's really this high sense of impunity which is there. So that also is one of the reasons I would say that you find this high level of high incidence of land grabbing and other crimes, not just land grabbing but other forms of crime. So if you look at this table, you see, and we asked types of people involved in those crimes that I've mentioned earlier on. See, journalists, 87.5% thought it was politicians. And if you go down that list, you see politicians is always number one, right? And then the second, it varies, youth leaders, Mastans. Now, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between youth leaders and Mastans. Mastans can be youth leaders can be Mastans. So, fine dividing line. And then, so you see the context, you see the characters who are involved. Basically, politicians and Mastans are heavily involved with both of those activities.
Can you explain these numbers? It's not very clear to me. So, 87% of the politicians of Dhaka constituency are involved?
No, our journalists who we interviewed, 87.5% said that politicians are involved.
It's a sample.
Right. It's a sample. Yeah. So so these are the characters who are involved with this, and then the other question that we asked out of many, that do you see a kind of variation in the level of Mastan power correlated with local economies? And here you see that it varies. For example, I talked about Khulna, number 6. You see 4.09. Dhaka, it's higher than Dhaka. Dhaka is 4.08. Yeah. And it's only in place like Rangpur, which is kind of rural up northwest, and a kind of quiet part of Bangladesh where it is 2.89. So this is also something interesting, that Mastan power is not same across the country. It varies from place to place depending on the kind of local economy, the activities which are going on. And so what are the kind of the broad conclusions that, and there are many more tables, and I don't want to bore you with all those other tables. You can have a look at them. Broad conclusion, set of conclusions that I have there is they are playing a major role in a society like Bangladesh, and they are basically linking different players, politicians with the business community. They are kind of acting as an intermediary in many ways, and without help of Mastan, it's very difficult to do things. In some areas, I mean, if you're in trouble, you don't go to the police station. You go to the Mastan, because most cases there are some she. Yes, there are some she. We did find some she. That they will able to actually resolve the issue more efficiently than actually going to the police. So they play quite a major role, but as I said earlier, it varies from place to place, and focus on two areas: crimes for profit, as I highlighted two of them, and also electoral violence. Before the election, during the election, they also play quite an important role, because they become the henchmen of the politicians, who will then go around forcing people or intimidating people in their own way to make sure that votes are cast in certain ways. So they do play again a role there. And as I said, crimes for profit, land grabbing, drug dealing, and the other is extortion, the three most common and profitable crimes for profit at the local level in our study. So that's one set of conclusions. And again, what we found, as I said, notable variation across cases, and here Mastan power varies from place to place. Such variation is, in some studies that we have seen, this is it's not been recognized. It's kind of been taken as a general in power, but what we tried to show is that there are some very significant variation from place to place, area to area, and in relatively small number of constituencies, wealth of MPs has increased dramatically. Now, I have not touched on that particular chapter, but just as a broad conclusion, I just wanted to put this to you and leave it with you, that of the wealth statements we looked at, 2008 and 2014, with a small number of MPs, there's been a huge dramatic rise, and that coincided in many ways with those constituencies where Mastan power is quite high too, and it also depends on the second point, that is greatest where economic opportunities are unique. As I said, for example, shrimp farming or real estate development, where local actors use Mastan powers in order to exploit those opportunities. And the fourth set of broad conclusions, use of Mastan power is correlated with extensive use of violence in local politics, such as murder and mass beatings. And this is something that we saw also with the recent local election that's taken place. I think there was something like, if I'm not mistaken, around a dozen, if not more than a dozen people who got killed during our local election that just finished, just happened. There is that correlation in terms of violence in local politics. And in some instances, the local actors involved in both areas, both economic and political, crime. These actors tend to be local politicians. Now, we couldn't really find a direct link between this kind of criminal activities and members of parliament, but informally people told us, because formally they were not prepared to give us this information, that there is link between not just local politicians and these kind of crime, but also members of parliament, or even further up from union to Upazila level politicians. There are those links, but we didn't pursue those links because it would be it would be quite dangerous, and also the study would become a much larger study. We didn't have the time and the resources to do that. And due to the secretive nature of such activities, it's difficult to establish the precise involvement of high-level politicians, and local informants insisted, as I said, that high-level politicians were involved and even directing many of these activities. But that is something we couldn't document. That is kind of more anecdotal rather than formal evidence that we can put forward. So what when we have a kind of a micro level kind of a situation of that kind, what impact does that have on the kind of macro governance picture? I think is the question that we need to ask. By just looking at the institutions like judiciary, civil service, parliament, does it give us the full picture? Because underneath these institutions, or within these institutions, there are people and their connections with others who are actually influencing the state of governance in a more profound way than if we just look at these big institutions and do a diagnostic of them and see, and apply this kind of framework of independence, accountability, efficiency, effectiveness. Doesn't really always give us the full picture. So, as I say, I think it's not rocket science that there is probably no silver bullet in terms of governance reform, and will vary from country to country in terms of how do we deal with it. I suspect it is kind of long term, and one has to deal with those strong, firmly embedded interest groups. And in a country like Bangladesh, if over the last 5 years, I would say that these strong, firmly embedded interest groups have become even stronger. That's my sort of feeling. So in a way, are we really moving in the wrong direction, or we need to come up with different policy solutions? So, what we say in the report is that empowering local actors I think is still the key, and some of the work that we've been discussing in terms of informal justice sector, working outside the kind of the courts, but more with citizens in terms of resolving their disputes, so ADR and legal empowerment of the people and the rest of it. I think we need to probably think a lot more on some of these issues. It has to be, in a way, a sustained social movement. It's not a 5-year reform program. It probably be generational, and it will take time, and and we need to look at it as a social movement, I suspect. Then, what we also say in the book is that land management issue is something that we need to deal with. It's been something which has been going on for ages. We have looked at it, from different angles. We have not got the solution, but we need to find a solution in terms of land management. Because when you have a plot of land which has got 10 documents floating around, you will have conflict. And how do you manage that situation? It's a property rights issue, and finally, at the end of the day, when we talk about impunity, then how do we address this issue of impunity? I think my feeling is that the rule of law becomes a really critical factor, and we need to really creatively start thinking about how to restore the rule of law. In many ways in the countryside, where people feel totally vulnerable, and the people, powerful, the community, the interest groups can get away with it all the time. So really, creativity in terms of in terms of restoration of rule of law, I suppose. But these are all very tentative suggestions and I think ideas. And as I said, the whole document is available there, and thank you very much. And I had 2 other people working with me, Jonathan, John, and Zakaria, So thanks to them, we managed to bring this together. Thank you.